me not having dressed up. I was like, "Ooh." I
Oh,
look
no.
at him, I'm like, it's a hot mess. This is great.
All right, so this is Bill Brock with Team Rogue, and today we have expert on, well, kind of just everything, Nancy Planeta, and hopefully I said that correctly. And so, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Nancy, just kind of who you are and what you're known for?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let's see. I've been in the paranormal fields for well over 20 years. And no, I'm not one of these people that says I've been in over 20 years when I haven't. There's actually a history backing me up with that. Uh, I am a pagan. So my perspective on things is a little different. I'm not what you would call a fluffy bunny pagan, I like to call them. Not a tree humper, nothing like that. I am a naturalist, but I'm also a realist. Uh, I've been involved in pretty much every field in the paranormal, some of them more deeply than others. But because of my involvement, and my main forte is research, that's what I'm called on to do 99.9% of the time. People have a case, people have a situation, people have seen something they don't understand or they can't identify. They'll call on me to try to get some background on it. If I don't have it in my immediate knowledge base, I'll dig it up. I'm very, very good at digging it up.
I've been paying attention to your Facebook page for a long time, and that's kind of why I contacted you because you have you just post some of the most interesting stuff. You have a great insight to well, just natural, the natural connection between the earth and the paranormal, if you will. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I am one of these people, and it's becoming more common. I'm seeing more like me now. It actually makes me smile because it's like, I hate to say it this way without sounding I don't want to sound condescending, but it's like people are growing up in the paranormal a little bit, where they're realizing that yes, it is about spirituality in some ways, but it's very, what we see and what we deem as paranormal is very natural. Yes, they can call it supernature if they want. In my mind, with all the research all the studying I've done, I think we're actually in some ways regressing genetically. That's why I think we're somewhat getting more in touch with things and understanding things on an amplified level. I always tell people quantum physics is a huge step in the field of the paranormal. It's allowed us to piece a lot of things together that normally we would not. It would have taken, literally, I don't think it was perceptibly possible before quantum physics.
Right. Yeah. Well, quantum physics gives you the ability to just kind of think outside the box, and that's part of the reason why I contacted you, because right now I'm doing a lot of research and actually writing a book on the connection of ancient sites and different energies and kind of how it all works together. Myself and Ronald Murphy have been working on this for a while, and you recently told me about an Indian mound in your area that has I don't know, it's a pretty cool history, and I really wanted to talk about that a little bit more. So can you tell me about this mound and maybe, I don't know, we'll kind of elaborate on it a little bit?
Well, the mound was actually, they've known about it. I live in a place called Safety Harbor, Florida, which is we call it a nook town. It's kind of nestled into Pinellas County on the far east side of the county, which is on the west central Florida coast. We are literally off Tampa Bay, which is the separating water from us in Tampa. And on the other side of the county is the Gulf of Mexico. So I always like to tell people, if you go on the boat on the body of water to the west, basically, yeah, don't get lost, because next place you're probably going to hit is Texas. But if you get lost in the bay, you're going to hit Tampa. So you can have a Cuban sandwich and laugh about it with your friends the next day. The mound itself was built by a tribe that is indigenous or local to this area, or was at one point in time. They're known as the Tokabega Indians. And they were one of several tribes that was local. And, people automatically, many times when they're familiar with Native American history, they make the assumption that the local tribes to Central Florida and Southern Florida would be automatically the Seminole Indians. While they are the largest tribe that we're aware of in this area, their history is actually much, much, much shorter than people think. I mean, the Seminoles really didn't come into existence until the 1600s, 1700s. And they were what we call a mixed breed tribe. They were a tribe that was integrated with escaped slaves and some of the disillusioned white people who had moved south. So you had a Native American population down here of different indigenous tribes that actually created their own tribe that became known as the Seminole Indians. The Tocobaga, no. The Tocobaga are actually, we've traced them as far back as 900 AD, and that's just in my localized area of Safety Harbor. The city itself that I live in is literally built on top of what was once a Tocobaga village. There is a park about 3 to 4 miles from where I live, not that far, where there's literally large mounds within the park that are known established Tocobaga sites. It's called, the one is called Sacred Mound. In fact, I think you posted pictures on Facebook of the pictures I actually took when I was talking to you on the phone. And you can this is a steep climb. In Florida, especially Central Florida, we are very flat. There's not a lot of hilly areas. So when you see something on a deep incline like that, it's questionable, because generally we don't see that.
So basically what there is, and let me just kind of picture this, because, I really have never been there. There is evidently like a large mound fairly close to the water. And around that mound is where the village was. And they basically were using this mound, from what I've read, all the way to, what, the 1500s or something like that? I don't know.
Literally, they were actually quite prevalent in the area, especially in Pinellas County, until the early 1500s, mid 1500s, and their disappearance is 100% pushed back or pointed at the European, basically the European incursion. We had Hernando de Soto, who actually landed in this area in the 1500s and found the mineral springs. We actually have freshwater mineral springs under Safety Harbor. In fact, behind my house, there's a 110-year-old hand crank, whatchamacallit?
Like pump, like mineral spring pump?
Yeah, a water pump that goes straight down into the spring water aqueduct that's below the county, which is, think about that. That's amazing, because we are surrounded by salt water on Pinellas County. Like, we literally, the only thing that connects us to Florida is this little strip of land up the north. I mean, otherwise we are a huge peninsula that sticks out. We're literally the chicken leg in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. And I think these Native Americans have some kind of connection with, I don't know, possibly the skunk ape, because you were telling me that there was recently a body that was unearthed that was, I don't know, just giant, right?
Well, the entire tribe, from what we have been able to gather, what local historians and archaeologists have gathered, it was a larger tribe. And that's not actually unusual for Florida. St. Augustine's establishment tribe also was very tall. Their women and men ranged from anywhere between 6'5" and 7'2". So, that's, even by African standards, that's tall.
Yeah. That's a really, really large guy, especially for back then. I mean, people think that people were a little bit smaller back in the day, but what we're starting to find is there were giants scattered all over the United States, not just in the Ohio Valley and some of the mounds there, but these things have been found all over the United States. And I think it's interesting that you've kind of stumbled on this, and then the theory of the skunk ape living there. I've always wondered if it's possible that little bits of these tribes were able to carry on life out in the swamps of Florida without being detected. But I don't know, because if you found one of their dead, let's say, you might think that was just someone recently lost in the woods and passed away. You wouldn't think that it was a tribe from 2,000 years ago that still exists in the middle of the swamp.
Thing, and there's still, people, again, although Florida is very settled, and then there's very large coastal populations. That's the actual key word there, coastal. The interior areas and the swamp areas of Florida that have not been dredged for development or whatever purpose they want to dredge it, it's quite set aside, and it's actually very non-amicable to people. And you probably know that. You've been at the Myakka River, and that's actually north of here. My area, you've got the Hillsborough River, which I believe there actually was a sighting of skunk ape there also recently. You have Pasco County, which is north of me, where there are skunk ape sightings all the time. Is there a connection to the tribe? It's possible. I can't say there isn't a possibility of that, but I also can say that with the explosion of modern pop culture and people's curiosity into these anomalies and into these myths and legends or tales that have been passed down, And don't get me wrong when I say that. I am a true believer that there's a nodule of truth in every myth, in every legend. It's all in how you're interpreting it or how they perceived it when they wrote it down. So it's kind of a matter of unlocking all these little boxes to actually get at what they were trying to describe to you. But as you know, we did see a huge rise in these reported sightings, and it's not just skunk ape. I mean, you've got the reptile man, which is he's like more central. He's towards Orlando. You'll hear people report lots of reports about I-4 corridor going over to Orlando. A report of a giant reptilian type person that runs across the interstate into the woods. I actually had a really good friend who is not. There's nothing flaky about her, literally. Had an experience, and it took her. It's kind of like, I mean, Bill, I don't know if you've ever gone ghost hunting, but it's like when you take an absolute skeptic on a hunt and something happens on that hunt that can't be explained.
I've done that. I went out with the main ghost hunters right here locally, and they had this ghost box thing where it like scans a whole bunch of channels really fast. And it was like answering our questions, like legit really answering our questions. So that blew me away because I am a skeptic. I'm going to go to the skeptic side of things way before I jump over to the believer side. You got to prove this stuff to me. And that was mind blowing. I mean, it was really happening.
Well, it's interesting, and like I say to people too, you have to play the statistical odds of things, especially when you're using equipment like that. What are the statistical odds that there's going to be a radio signal that's going to bounce back at that exact moment with an accurate answer? And I'm not talking yes or no answers, because sometimes those boxes they'll come up with things where you're like, whoa, that's actually a complete sentence, and it's actually very accurate, and it's not a perceptional twisting of what you've heard. It's a direct answer, and it's got information in that answer that could not possibly, there's no random calculator. The odds of it being that answer would be insane. And it does happen. And if you notice, see what you've got to keep track of, you say I'm a naturalist, keep track of ley lines in the areas of where you're doing these investigations. Because you're going to find a lot of times in areas where your ley lines are intersecting or running in certain ways, you're going to actually get more EVPs.
Really? So that works in ghost hunting as well, because like what we're checking out right now with all the mounds across the United States is a lot of these mounds are in either ley lines or areas where there's a massive magnetic anomaly, like where a meteor crashed, like where the Serpent Mound is in Ohio. A meteor hit it with such force that it actually drove basically molten lava right down into the center of the earth, changed the magnetic field in that area, and it's completely different than other places. So that's something that we work with too, and in the mounds of cryptozoology. I mean, whatever this is seems to be attracted to ley lines and different kinds of energies. It's really odd.
Well, I think ley lines were actually, and again, this is my ancient alien side, and I work with that field very, very closely because, again, research. When you look at the ancient alien side of things, and yeah, some of their theories are Yahoo out there. I mean, took you all night to really think of that spin story. But some of it makes a very interesting sense. One of those things being that history is absolutely cyclical. It keeps repeating itself over and over. And I've said to people, listen, you can't rule out being an alien hybrid. You cannot intelligently rule that out. But you also cannot intelligently rule out the fact that society has probably risen and fallen multiple times. And that everything we're seeing right now, all the information that we're collecting, all the reawakening of knowledge that is actually very, very ancient. And we're wrapping it up in this wrapping paper of, oh, look what we've discovered, when that's actually a crock of crap. You can go back and read some of the Sumerian Sanskrit tablets. You can read different origins within ancient history where they already knew that.
Right.
So either we're dumbasses, or the fact is this all happened before. We've had very advanced societies before. So what makes you think that if we have ley lines that we know there's magnetic differences on, and we do know that, what if they used it for established means of communication? What if they were able to, at some point in time in the very far, the distant past, be able to use it to as wormhole connections.
Well, that brings up a really interesting theory that I've really been researching hard lately. NASA recently put out there that they can prove that energy travels through some type of portal when massive amounts of magnetic fields cross. So let's say there's a huge magnetic storm coming off of the sun. It hits us, forms all these crazy looking magnetic waves, and where those waves cross is where these portals happen.
Yes.
Now, if the ancients were intelligent enough to know where these magnetic anomalies were on the Earth, were they able to use those magnetic anomalies when these sunbursts happen in order to not necessarily travel through another dimension, but did they know something that we don't know? Were they able to use this energy in a way that benefited them in some way?
Well, again, let's look at where most of the ancient monuments are built. Look at their location. Look at Chichen Itza, the temples in Greece. Look at freaking Egypt. I mean, the pyramids are actually built at a central cross line of the ley lines. So, and even Stonehenge. I mean, they're all located in very, like I said, it's way too, there's no way this is coincidental because there's too many of them situated on these areas that are actually crossbars of ley lines. And, again, they say that there are huge pulsations or lack of pulsation. So in other words, you have a huge upthrust of, say, magnetic energy and then a downshot of magnetic energy in these areas. Why is that? What is it naturally? And how the hell did people 3, 4, 5,000 years ago know about it when we're just figuring it out again now?
I have no idea. And it's something that really just kind of blows my mind. There's this place called the Ringing Rocks in Pennsylvania. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes, I have.
All right. So I started researching the Ringing Rocks, and I just knew that there had to be something more to this place than a bunch of rocks just that when you beat on them, they ring. Well, so myself and AJ Marston, a buddy of mine, went out there and we started looking into these things a little bit more. And we found that the magnetic field there is insane. Like you cannot even get a compass to work correctly. Like it doesn't work, And so we started looking around and we found these massive, massive boulders that were like, I don't know, the size of a car that were precisely, I'm telling you, perfectly cut in north, south, east, and west. We were able to take my cell phone. It must use a different type of calibration in order to find northeast, south, and west than a regular compass. And I'm able to like hold this thing high enough where it's not freaking out. And you can see where it's like perfectly lined up with this rock. So once we see this rock, I'm like, all right. So the Hopo and Adina really enjoyed like building things on straight lines to where you could like look down a line and be able to like almost even see a trajectory to the next mound, because I think these things are also kind of like resupply points too. But anyway, I got down and I looked through this crack in the rock, and it like led to another rock that was way out in the woods that had a map drawn on the thing. And so like this map showed where the river was ahead of us, and it had like another little like shoot off that evidently, I don't know what it went to, but I know that the one went to the river, and then the other one, I don't know, it was probably just different then, but that blew me away. That blew me away that the ancients put things in places to like last forever. You know what I mean? Like these things still work. You can still go to like Fort Ancient and use the astrological calendars there. It's unreal. It's amazing how intelligent these people were.
Well, and even, like I said, there was even tribes of nomadic Arabs that preceded the Egyptians who actually were very familiar with the star systems. And it's like, you sit there and you say, wait a minute. So they're talking about Orion's belt. How many thousands of years ago? And they knew that there was another star system out there that we didn't discover until the 1960s.
Right.
So how did that actually happen?
I have no idea. And the Serpent Mound in Ohio is pretty much exactly lined up with Draco constellation. And that's mind-blowing. These people that lived 2,000 years ago were extremely intelligent. And I don't know what kind of actual connection they really had with aliens, let's say, or any other extraterrestrial influence. But these people were intelligent. They could have very well been more intelligent than we are. They just didn't have electricity. I mean, really,
We
that's
don't even know that for sure, though, because again, in the pyramids, they've uncovered things that could have been used as a battery. So we don't know that for sure. We just know that, and again, no, please, people, do not take offense to anything I'm saying. I'm just going through rational logic here. We just know that with the rise of the church, as we currently see it, those things were locked away. Those things were destroyed and locked away in the Vatican vaults. And people don't, I've said to people, you think you know what's under the Vatican. You have no idea. There's over 50 miles of vaults underneath the Vatican, storing information that goes all the way back to basically the 3rd century Council of Nicaea that we know of. So to make a comparison, we see right now where ISIS is moving into different areas in the Middle East, where they destroyed Palmyra, which is a wonderful remnant of history that's now gone. The fact is they weren't there to. The reason they destroyed the monuments was because they didn't want people to have a connection to a Christian or a Jewish past. They wanted to be able to build on top of that to make it a Muslim past. And the Christians did the same thing 2,000 years ago. So we're kind of caught in this vortex of whatever may have existed. We don't have access to it. We're kind of like children relearning things all over again.
You're absolutely right, because when the settlers first came here, they completely wiped out all of these Native American mounds in order to grow crops, which to them at the time was much more important than this beautiful Native American mound.
Well, and don't forget, they were referred to as barbarians. I mean, and I always remind people this, guys, it wasn't until the late 1970s, 1980s, where we actually kind of learned that the indigenous people were abused by us when we moved here. Because prior to that, if you opened a history textbook in class, you were taught that Custer was not a bad person and that he had no choice but to do what he did at Little Bighorn. I mean, literally, the way history was taught up until the 80s, you were not taught that there was a mass genocide that occurred with the Native Americans. You were taught about the Trail of Tears.
Mm.
But they didn't go into great detail as to how absolutely brutal that was and how many children died. And I mean, they literally wiped out entire tribes, entire bloodlines.
Right. I often wonder what happened to a lot of the civilizations that were in, I guess you would say, ancient Ohio River Valley area. Like the Hopewell and Adena, they just mainly, I guess, the Hopewell and the Adena kind of just vanished, really. But they just couldn't follow them. They just kind of vanished, and they never really knew why. I often wondered if maybe explorers from ancient times made it there, down the Ohio River Valley, and possibly killed these people with viruses, just like they did in your area, because that tribe that you spoke of was completely wiped out by people coming there, right?
They believe it was smallpox. They're not 100%, but that was the one that was the main killer of the tribes in this area. And it was the one because they were, the explorers were locked on these boats for months, if not years at a time. And they were generationally kind of immune to smallpox at that point. So there were carriers who were actually dormant. In other words, it wasn't affecting them, but they were still contagious to others. Mm-hmm. And one of the curious things I always point out to people is, it only took 3 decades to wipe out an indigenous tribe where they were plentiful when the explorers landed. So 30 years, it wiped them all out, which kind of I have a hard time with logically, because I understand how the anatomy works, and I understand how genetics work. And I understand that the fact is that there's always going to be one person who survives and develops an immunity, and that immunity will pass down genetically. That's why Europe didn't get wiped out by the smallpox.
Right.
You eventually build immunities to it, and those immunities actually pass down. They didn't have vaccinations for smallpox in the 1500s, so yeah, don't go the vaccination route with me. It's literally they developed immunities through generations.
Right.
Why did that happen to the indigenous people?
I'm sorry to talk over you, Nancy. I apologize. But I was reading about that mound in your area. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but I was reading about it, and it said that it was in use up until the time the first settlers got here.
Yes.
And I looked everywhere to figure out what in use meant, because there is no records that I can find anywhere of a mound building society being documented and just researched at all by anyone. You know, these are just records that were lost thousands of years ago. Have you heard of what these mounds were used for at all?
There's different theories that float around, because literally there's not a lot of written anything from these tribes. Even if they're, you know, I always tell people, even if they did drawings in trees or on rocks in Florida, especially in coastal Florida, that would not survive very long. Thank you to the storm seasons, thank you to rising and receding waters. There's a lot of weathering that occurs down here. So basically any written form would be actually amazing to discover. A lot of how they kind of go about trying to identify what things were used for is, number one, by the written accounts of the sailors who landed here. So in other words, the Europeans. And you've got to keep in mind there would have been communication issues, because the native tribes didn't obviously speak Spanish. Right. And the Spanish obviously didn't speak the type of Native American that they were speaking. And also they have uncovered pottery. They've uncovered different facets of their life, and they can date that pottery. They can date that to that time period. So they say, yeah, okay, we have pottery remnants coming from the 1500s. So we know that, yeah, they were here when the explorers got here, because this is dating to the same exact time period. They do have a means of dating, but they can't say definitively what it was used for. And I don't think, knowing the way Native Americans work, no matter what tribe they're from, there's certain things that hold true with almost all tribes. One is that they do not share their sacred mysteries with strangers. That's a no-go. Even now, if you speak to a shaman, I've had the privilege of interviewing several shamans on my show, and I can tell you for a fact, if they're legitimate shamans, yeah, they don't volunteer information. You have to respectfully word your question, and they have to trust you with the answer. And if they don't, yeah, you're not going to get an answer. You're going to actually not even you're not getting an answer. You'll get stone silence.
Yeah, they totally avoid it. I've kind of ran into the same thing a few times myself, and you have to be respectful. Absolutely, that's definitely true.
Yep, but it would be the same going back. So I'm not surprised that the explorers may or may not have had a record of what that mound was used for, because if it was sacred, as the archaeologists are saying, yeah, this was a sacred site to them. If it was sacred, like they believe it was, they probably wouldn't have shared that information. I can tell you it's not a burial. That particular mound is not a burial mound. But I can tell you in Pinellas County, there are Tocobaga burial mounds all over the place. In fact, we still have issues with developers who buy land and start digging, and guess what? They've now disturbed a 1,000-year-old burial site. Right. Even the skeleton they found that I was telling you about, which I could literally walk to the library, with right behind my house, walk over to, or not the library, the museum, and they reburied her. They reinterred that native in front of the museum. So
and how tall was she again? She was like 7 foot, right?
She was, I think she was 6'6" or 6'7", and she literally was over 1,000 years old.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. But like I said, at least I'm very happy to say I live in an area that is respectful of these things, and they reinterred her in a beautiful area that's cordoned off. And they leave it open for the kids to come see, the school kids to take, to be able to pay respect and kind of learn what they know about that tribe. I mean, because the museum does carry some of the historical items that they found on the archaeological digs. I will say it's an itty bitty little museum too. It's a tiny little rinky-dink place, but it's got a heck of a history in there.
That's really
and so, like I said, they gave her a view. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm listening. I was listening. They gave her a view, so they put her like in a place where you can see.
They literally reinterred her, and she's facing the bay. So her grave is literally, the sun comes up right on her grave every morning.
Wow. Oh, that's
so
something.
It's really kind of cool.
Yeah, that really is cool. And I found that the mound builders were really they faced a lot of things to see the morning light. So when the sun come up, there was always kind of something that happened. And I'm curious, have you ever been out to maybe that mound close to your house and maybe stood on it at sunrise, or do you know of anybody that does that? Like, have you heard anything?
It's funny because I have not had that opportunity only because the where the mound is located is a state park now. And state parks run from basic first light till dusk. They do not stay open after dark. They do not open before sunrise. The only time they do actually open that park before sunrise is for sunrise services on Easter Sunday. Hello, pagan. Kind of really no need for me to try to wade my way through 1,000 people to get to a sunrise service that I kind of misplaced in.
Right.
But I've heard and I've talked to people who have snuck into the park after dark. And they say it is interesting. There's actually a back way to get into the park that it open accesses at the end into a development, believe it or not, where there's houses. And you take this little bridge, you can walk across this little bridge and get into the park. You're not supposed to, but people do it because it's a huge, it's several square miles of walking trails and everything else. And there's some people that like to walk late at night or early in the morning. And they have said that when you get closer to that area of the park, it's how did one person describe it to me? For an area in the middle of a wildlife, pretty much refuge, it is very quiet in that area. And remember I said to you, I laugh when I come out here because all the meditation people and the yoga people all sit around the gigantic oak tree.
Yeah.
There's a massive oak tree right next to that mound that's very, very old. And they will literally sit around it doing drum circles and meditation and everything else. And I won't lie. It does make me laugh because I'm like, really? You could do that in your living room and be just great. Go in the backyard, sit on the lawn, you'd be good.
Well, I've got to back up these people a little bit, just for the sake of argument. So a lot of these places, these sacred places, are connected with energy of the earth. Like we were talking about earlier. Fort Ancient did this to myself and my friend that went there. You get chills, like your hair literally stands up on end, and I've read that has something to do with the energy of the earth being different there, going back to the ley lines, going back to like the magnetic differences of these areas. Maybe these people are just a little bit more in touch with what's going on than maybe you or I are.
It's very possible. I just don't know how they can meditate with people running around them all the time. That's kind of my point. I'm like, how do you actually ground down and meditate when you've got all this action? Because it is, the area I'm speaking of is open to the public. So there's quite a few people that actually, we get a lot of foreign tourists, especially in Safety Harbor. We have a gigantic spa that's built on top of the mineral springs. So a lot of people come in from Europe to actually bathe in the mineral springs. And they always go over to the park. That's a huge tourist attraction for them. So I always think to myself, God, this isn't like this is where you're sitting in the beach next to a piece of driftwood and it's nothing but you and the waves. This is kind of offsetting.
Yeah,
definitely. When I was talking on the phone, you could hear all the people talking in the background.
Little kids crying, people running by. Like, I don't know. I couldn't do it, but I would be the guy who snuck in the middle of the night to sit on that mound and try to find out why it's there. Because these people didn't just build things for the heck of it. Like I said, willy-nilly, just let's build a mound. They didn't do that. They built that mound for a reason. Yep. And most likely that mound was meant for sunrise, sunset, or I don't know. People talk about just storing things, but I don't think that's true. I think that most of these things are astrological influence, whether it's summer equinox, winter equinox, sunrise, sunset, something like that. I would absolutely love to be able to just hang out in that area, sunrise to sunset on the summer equinox and the winter equinox, and just try to figure out why they built it and what it's there for. And I don't know. It's just intriguing to me, intriguing, and I'm just rambling now, but I can't even help it. The fact that these Native Americans were massive people, and like I said, I've got reports all the way to California of these massive Native Americans being found underground, because my show Monsters Underground has people telling me about all these things that they find underground.
Yep.
So I know that this is true. I know that there are some massive Native Americans across the United States. And in your area, I often wonder if maybe some of those tribes are still out there. I mean, that if you look at science, basically, there's a better chance of one of these Native American tribes being able to like hang out for a while than there is Gigantopithecus living for an extra 20,000 years and still be in the woods.
Well, I mean, and the thing is that, you make the assumption that everything and everybody was wiped out by certain things or certain viruses. And while that definitely appears to be the case, we don't know that for sure. There's no way to know that for sure. There's so many unexplored areas in this area just simply because of the harshness of the environment. I was laughing because not too long ago, they actually did an episode of Naked and Afraid in the freaking Florida Everglades. And I was like, yeah, no, not so pleasant down there. I would definitely not want to be naked in the middle of the Florida Everglades. I mean, it is a harsh environment. But if anybody was capable of surviving in that environment and doing so without being seen or even heard, it would be probably somebody of native descent. And again, these were large people. These were big boned people. These were, when you think of Native American, it's funny because you do not think of anything, even now, the current Native American tribes, there's not too many men over 6 feet. Anglos actually are usually bigger. But during that time period when the Europeans were coming over, if you were 5'4" as a European male, you were considered tall. I mean, that was considered average. 5'4" to 5'6" for a male, and women were a lot shorter than that. And I think to myself, what happened? Where was this inbreeding? Where did this inbreeding occur? Was it the Nords? Because the Nords did run taller.
And you're talking about basically like the Viking influence, because we know the Vikings came at some point in time. Probably, if I had to guess at it, I would say probably around 900 to 1400 BC.
Yep, and that's right about the time they believe that Tocobaga tribe established.
So yeah, so they're being established probably close to the same time Leif Erikson decided to take his trip. So I don't know. You could be right. They could have some kind of DNA from that, and it'd be interesting to do a large DNA study to find out where these people really came from.
Well, that, and you also have to think of the fact that again, there's a nodule of truth to every legend. And I always say that to people: pay attention to the legends, listen to them carefully, because there's always something in there that's going to be proven true eventually. Best example would have been the Planet X thing that's been becoming very, very famous all of a sudden, because Caltech actually discovered that, there's some kind of a terrestrial object out there that's causing an influence on the Kuiper belts. Okay, probably another planet or something, close to the size of one. Well, who do you think wrote about that? I mean, the first forms of writing, Sanskrit, the Sumerians wrote about a planet that orbits and comes around. They actually, it was a planet killer. They actually talked about it rotating in and out of orbit anywhere between 3,600 and 5,600 years. So how did they know that? And that would cause something. And I always tell people, look at the legends of Lemuria. Look at the legends of Atlantis. Look at these legends and then do the timing in your head and think, what would have happened if we had something, a celestial body large enough to really affect our planet gravitationally? What would happen? The waters would rise. Well, what could that do? Well, that could sink a continent. That could sink a lot of things, actually, if you think about it. And then you're saying, okay, wait, we've got these tall tribes coming from all over, and we can't seem to be able to backtrack. Well, maybe they came from the middle. Maybe they came from somewhere that's not there anymore.
Right. I don't know. I'm not sure, like, if I think that a planet would get that close to our planet without really disrupting massive amount of things, like basically just throwing it off kilter. But I don't know.
It's not that it gets that close, Bill. It's that it's where it's coming through, where its projected route would be, puts it through a massive asteroid belt. And that disruption of this trajectory that only brings it around ever so often would disrupt a tremendous amount in that belt and throw it in our direction.
Okay, I got you. I see what you're saying.
Plausible. It is plausible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like I say to people, you can't rule that oil hat theory, because unfortunately it actually makes, in astrophysics, it actually makes sense. Thus the paper by Caltech, because it makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. But all right, well, I am going to cut this short here in another couple minutes. I was trying to think of anything else I really wanted to ask you before we get off here. I like to try to make these things about an hour long. But I guess the biggest thing for me is, do you think that these Native American Indian mounds have any kind of real, like, let's say, paranormal experiences going on there? Do you think that would be...
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yes, I can tell you that for a fact. Just because I know people who've had massive experiences, not so much with the Philippine mound, but we have, again, I told you, Pinellas is covered with mounds. There's an area south of us called Wheaton Island. It's about maybe 10 minutes. I know a Boy Scout troop leader who takes his kids out there every summer to camp, and the stories he could tell you. I mean, he says it's beyond strange. Now, Wheaton Island got multiple burial mounds, multiple known burial mounds. So it's very interesting.
So you think these things could be a real source of energy? And
yes. And if you follow the lines of the paranormal, again, what do investigators in the paranormal always say? There's always an uptick in certain instrument reads when there's activity. The only thing we can't discern is that uptick because of a projection of energy of the people who are actually investigating, or is it electrical? What's causing that uptick? But we can tell you when the meters start going off, when we're starting to get strange readings on our equipment that we can't necessarily explain, whether that be temperature drop, whether that be electromagnetical massive fluxes. We can tell you that, as, excuse the expression, you're not FCC, but shit's happening at that point. I mean, I've had experiences in the location, and I am not a person who gives into that very easily, but I had one location, I swear to God, it was like somebody was inside the wall banging as hard as they could against the wall, trying to get your attention. I mean, to the point where the pictures were shaking on the wall. And to stand there as somebody who is very skeptical in a lot of ways, and I'm literally, this would be me, I'm looking at the blueprints of the house, literally had them laid out on the floor. And this was a house that was built in the 1870s, and believe it or not, it was built on top of a Seminole massacre, where a large Indian massacre had occurred. And I'm reading the blueprints, and I'm going, there's no piping in that wall. I'm looking at the wall and looking at the blueprints, and I'm trying to go logical, saying, okay, Nancy, you have some contractor experience here. You were in property management for a lot of years. You know what can cause aches, screams, groans, and all these things in the walls that are nothing to do with the paranormal. First thing I'm going to look for, pipes. Yeah, no pipes in that wall.
Wow.
That's
crazy.
Wall. That's got nothing in it. And
so it was a real experience. Something was beating on the wall that shouldn't have been there.
Something was causing that wall to literally, like it was being hit with a jackhammer. I mean, it was boom, boom, and the wall is just literally shaking. And the pictures on the wall are doing this. And I'm standing back in the hallway, and I have a team member who's down the hall going, literally could not get 2 words out of his mouth that made sense, because
wow,
we're just looking at this thing lifting off the wall, and I'm going, and I'm standing right in front of it, just looking at it going, oh crap. I mean, not a lot I can do to explain that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not. I've experienced some weird stuff myself, and I'm definitely a believer in the paranormal and ghosts because I've definitely had some experiences. But before we get off here, I want to give you a chance to let everyone know where they can find you. You have a radio show and a webpage, and what are they?
Actually, I've got multiple. I've got the Vixen's Vault, which runs on ipbn.fm.com. Big thanks to Rocky Stucci and Scotty Roberts. You may be familiar with Scotty. He's very much into the ancient alien side of things. Vault has been running since 2007, and I do all sorts of different types of interviews on the Vault. Paranormal, conspiracy. I'm kind of all over the map. You guys can find that at www.thevixensvault.com, or just type in Wiccan Vixen online, and Google will actually take you to whichever link because it'll get you to that page. On Facebook, I'm the only Nancy Planeta on Facebook. Planeta is very phonetic. Planet with an A on the end. I always tell people it's planet with an orbiting satellite. Planet A.
Nice.
Super simple to find me on Facebook. Otherwise, my Twitter account is linked to my Facebook. I am not a tweeter. No, that's kind of not my thing. Facebook, you'll find interesting. There's not too many subjects I'm afraid to dabble in. Let's put it that way. A lot of what I post is to make people think critically. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing with me. It's about getting you to turn that motor on in your head and think about things on a much more critical level. Stop taking things at face value. It's one of the things we learn in the paranormal. You have to look much, much deeper. There's a lot of aspects involved that you have to take into consideration, including psychology, environment, construction. All of those things have to be factored in to anything that you're doing, especially if you want to be taken seriously. That's pretty much it. That's where you can catch me. And like I said, my radio show, when it's running right now, we're on hiatus, but when it runs on Sunday evenings from 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. So you can catch me. I always post when I'm going on air. And like I said, I'm all over the place with interviews. I hit all different areas, all different venues, including, like I did the Kennedy assassination with a guy who was actually 50 years of research into that.
Crazy. Yeah, so definitely check out Nancy. She's awesome. She's a great person to follow. And I'm going to conclude this now. And Nancy, stick around. I got a couple questions for you myself. And to all you guys, I'll see you again next time. Thank you.